Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. These are the headlines from across the continent this evening. In Mozambique, the incumbent President Filipe Nyusi was declared the landslide winner in a general election earlier this month. We'll talk to France 24's Frank Hersey about that result and why it is being contested. And in Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has vowed to bring to justice those responsible for violence that killed some 67 people in the past week. We'll talk to Nicolas Germain of our Africa desk about that violence and why it happened. Meanwhile, we'll take a look in Cameroon at how big American labels are teaming up with local production companies to seek out new talent in the African music scene. Thanks for watching Eye on Africa. Now we start in Mozambique, where President Filipe Nyusi is set for a second term. Now, official results give his ruling Frelimo party 73% of the vote. Frelimo has been in power since 1975, when the country gained independence from Portugal. The main opposition party and former rebel group Renamo are contesting that result. France 24's Frank Hersey has been following events in Mozambique this electoral season. Frank, the election was marred by sporadic violence, and there were allegations of fraud as voting proceeded. But yet a landslide win. It has set tongues wagging, hasn't it, about the vote's credibility?
Well, yes, it has. And it's not really just the vote's credibility, but the credibility of democracy in Mozambique. 'Cause people were expecting the ruling party to win, but not by such a large margin. When we were there and we were speaking to people in the polling stations, they told us how they expected Frelimo to win again. They are popular, they have a much more presence. But they were still going along. They were voting out of principle, especially the first-time voters who had plenty of hope. But when you're there and you're speaking to analysts, they'd already called the result, because people this time weren't just voting for a president. They were voting for the legislative election, but also for provincial governors for the first time, because there's been ongoing negotiations between the ruling party and the opposition. And so this time around, they were going to have roles for provincial governors. And each province would now choose the governor once that province had won. Unfortunately, Frelimo has won every single province, so the opposition feels very much pushed out. But also because of the structure this time, the ruling party had to make sure that they won for the presidential vote everywhere, as well as the provincial role. So people would be unlikely to vote for a Frelimo president and a Renamo provincial governor. And so people fear that, the analysts told us that they would have to make sure they had a clean sweep and make sure they won absolutely everything. So it's very much a winner takes all. And so that's why we've ended up with 73% for Nyusi and Frelimo winning every single provincial governor seat. And so people in Mozambique feel like they've over-egged the pudding in a way. And the EU observer mission said that the vote took place in an unlevel playing field and called it a climate of fear. And so based on all this, the two main opposition parties have rejected the results. And even the Electoral Commission, which has to approve the results, only just went ahead and approved them in a vote of 9-8. And so, yes, it is a loss of credibility, but it seems like the ruling party was prepared to take that hit.
Okay, Frank, and assuming that the ruling party managed to get over these accusations of voting fraud, what can we expect for the next electoral term? What's on the agenda for Frelimo and President Filipe Nyusi?
Well, we went to a rally by the President Nyusi, just before the end of campaigning, and he described to the crowd his first term as being all about peace, 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 what he said. And then he told the crowd that his second term would be work, work, work. And seeing as the opposition party, which is still armed, didn't win any of those provincial governor posts it wanted, peace might not be something that President Nyusi can take for granted in this second term. And that work is to hold the country together so that it can reap the benefits of its massive gas reserves. Because we're seeing around $50 billion of investment coming in from the likes of ExxonMobil and Total. And so while those deals were postponed over and over during Nyusi's first term, the government was hit by a $2 billion loan scandal. And so what we're seeing for this second term is that the big challenge is to keep this ongoing Islamist insurgency in the north at bay, because it's up there in the northernmost province, Cabo Delgado, where all the gas is, and that's where they're having a lot of trouble with these Islamist insurgencies. And so Nyusi and Frelimo will be in power while Mozambique becomes, all being well, one of the largest gas producers in the world. People there are calling it the Qatar of Africa, but it's looking very much like it will be work, work, work.
Okay, Frank Kersey, thank you so much for that update on the situation in Mozambique. Now to Ethiopia next, where Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has vowed to bring to justice those responsible for violence that left at least 67 people dead in the past week. Violence erupted in the capital, Addis Ababa, and the outlying Oromia region on Wednesday after a prominent activist accused security forces of trying to orchestrate an attack against him. Now, Nicolas Germain is in studio from our Africa desk to explain a little bit more. Nicola, this all started last week when Jawar Mohammed, this activist and media mogul, he claimed he felt his own personal security was under threat. And the police are saying this is all not true. We have in no way threatened him. So who is this man, for those who aren't familiar with Jawar Mohammed, and why has he become a sort of lightning rod for protesters in Ethiopia against the Prime Minister?
Well, he's a young man. He's only 33. He's from the Oromo people, like the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And the Oromos, they are the biggest, largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, which, of course, is the second most populous country in Africa with more than 100 million inhabitants. So Jawar Mohammed, he left Ethiopia in 2003 to study abroad. And quite quickly, he became one of the most popular opposition politicians in exile. In Minneapolis, he created a media called the Oromia Media Network. And with this media, he organised many of the protests, the large protests between 2015 and 2018, where many people were saying that the Oromo people were marginalised. And these protests, of course, they led to the resignation of Prime Minister Dessalines and the arrival in power of Abiy Ahmed. So you can really say that he helped Abiy Ahmed come to power. And when Abiy Ahmed came to power, he released many political prisoners. He allowed the return of opposition activists such as Jawar Mohammed, who made a triumphant return in the summer of 2018. What we can also say about Jawar Mohammed is that he's eloquent. He has nearly 2 million followers on Facebook. He's described as a hard-working man and a disciplined man, but his detractors, they say that he is a populist.
Now, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, he's an excellent reputation internationally. He's just won the Nobel Peace Prize for forging a peace deal with neighbouring Eritrea. But this conflict with minorities in Oromia, it risks overshadowing all of that. Why has the relationship soured to such an extent then between Ahmed and Jawar Mohammed, this activist figure?
Indeed, initially they were friends. When he returned to Ethiopia, he became an advisor to Abiy Ahmed, but very quickly it was a love-hate relationship, and Abiy saw him as a potential rival. But the main difference politically between the two men is that Jawar is what they call an ethno-nationalist. His priority is for more political and cultural autonomy for the Oromo people, whereas Abiy Ahmed, he doesn't want to talk about ethnic politics. He's interested in Ethiopia as a nation. But the paradox is that because of his reforms, Abiy Ahmed's reforms, there is now greater freedom of speech, and this has led to a rise in ethnic tensions. We saw it last week, 67 people killed in Oromia. Amnesty International says that there have been dozens of arrests in Oromia, so the tensions are real. Abiy Ahmed, he's targeted Jawar Mohammed without mentioning his name. For example, recently he criticised media owners who don't have an Ethiopian passport. Jawar Mohammed was born in Ethiopia, but he's a US citizen. The big question now is what happens in the next year's election in 2020. Abiy Ahmed is a likely candidate, but will Jawar Mohammed be a candidate? He said he doesn't exclude this, and if he is a candidate, this would be a real political blow for his former friend Abiy Ahmed.
Nicolas Germain, thanks for that update on the situation in Ethiopia. Now, social media and streaming platforms have helped many African musicians to build a reputation, and companies like Sony and Universal are taking note. Sony has just signed a partnership with the Cameroonian label Makia. Now, Makia's role in the deal is to headhunt up-and-coming talent. So can this be a win-win situation, or might African artists end up being exploited by such deals? Our reporters went to find out more.
You're my lady, the result of my life.
Behind the mic, latest Cameroon music sensation Nelio Star's smooth voice echoes in the studio as he records an urban Afropop rhythm.
Non, là tu as tué mon petit.
The upcoming artist just signed up to intercontinental record label Sony Music, which recently launched a hunt for talents in Africa.
They have come to support a generation of artists no one believed in before now. They see the star in you and they decide to hire you. I really hope people will get to know Neliostar this way.
Here in Cameroon, local producer Bob Jani is charged with scouting young talents for Sony Music. He is working with several singers on the continent. Like this young artist, many are ready for the big break. With the ever-pressing need for finances, Bob Jani has his young talent sign contracts with international record labels.
Now he will be recognized by the Copyright Office. He will be entitled to his author's rights and all the benefits an artist should get through his music. He will earn a living from his art and nothing more. That is our goal. The goal is to give African music a structure.
But in Yaoundé, other Cameroonian artists are skeptical about the juicy nature of these contracts. Crotal is a forerunner of Cameroon urban music, and he has strong doubts over the hunt for African talents. He fears local artists will not get that much from these foreign music houses.
African music is a huge influence around the world. But when it comes to income generated from authors' rights and royalties, we get just about 2%. So any good businessman will tell you there is nothing to lose. Let's go there and give them all contracts.
A juicy hunt for musical markets in Africa and the Middle East, whose size is expected to double over the next 2 years from $50 to $90 million.
Now, we'll close this bulletin with some award-winning photography. This past weekend, the 8th edition of the Uganda Press Photo Awards took place, and this was the winning snapshot. In Her Own World is the name of the photo, and the photographer is Katumba Badru Sultan. Now, what you see here is an image on front of Uganda's National Mosque. You see a young girl standing in a large crowd of mostly male worshippers. Usually Islam does not allow men and women to mix during prayers. So In Her Own World, it was the winner of this year's Uganda Press Photo Awards this past weekend. That brings us to the end of this bulletin. Thanks for watching Eye on Africa.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.